Welcome. Tonight, we're drifting through the invisible architecture of Pokémon, exploring the hidden systems that quietly shape every journey. Mechanics that most trainers never notice, working silently beneath the surface of battles, captures, and friendships. There's something calming about uncovering these secrets, about understanding the gentle mathematics that govern this world we've loved for so long. So settle in wherever you are right now. Let your breathing slow and allow yourself to wander through these quiet discoveries with me. Before you drift off, maybe tap subscribe and tell me where you're watching from tonight. The first mystery lies in something every trainer experiences, but few truly understand. The moment when a Pokeball shakes in your hand, that familiar rhythm of hope and suspense before the final click. It feels like chance, like luck. But beneath that simple animation lives a labyrinth of invisible calculations, formulas, deciding your fate before the ball even touches the ground. In the earliest games, capture seemed straightforward enough. Weaken a creature, throw a ball, and wait. But the mathematics behind that moment were anything but simple. Every species carried a hidden value called a catch rate, a number buried deep in the code that determined how easily they could be contained. A small bird on the first route might have a catch rate so generous that nearly every attempt succeeded. Meanwhile, a legendary guardian of the seas carried numbers so restrictive that entire stockpiles of balls could vanish without success. What makes this system so fascinating is how it shifted between generations, often without explanation. In some games, the type of ball multiplied your odds under very specific circumstances. A net ball carried hidden bonuses against water and bug types. A dusk ball grew stronger in caves or at night. These details were never explained outright, leaving trainers to stumble upon them through experimentation or whispered knowledge shared between friends. This secrecy turned capture into something almost mythic. Certain trainers swore by rituals, pressing buttons at the exact moment the ball clicked, unaware that real hidden variables were doing the work. The truth was far more intricate than anyone realized, evolving quietly between titles while maintaining the outward illusion of consistency. Even stranger are the quirks tied to status conditions. From the beginning, inflicting sleep or paralysis increased capture odds, but the way these bonuses were applied shifted with each new installment. At times, putting a target to sleep doubled the chance outright. At other points, the multiplier was weaker but still noticeable. Poison and burn, oddly enough, never carried bonuses at all, despite seeming just as debilitating. This led to decades of confusion as trainers debated which strategies were most effective. Among the most obscure mechanics hidden within the capture formula is something known as the shake check. When a ball lands, it shakes up to 3 times before a final click determines success. To most, it feels like suspense building with each shake. But behind the scenes, the game is not rechecking odds at every movement. Instead, success or failure is decided immediately upon the throw, with the shaking purely for effect. This means that when a ball bursts open after the third shake, it is not because of a sudden failure at the last second. The result was predetermined the moment the attempt began. Many trainers never realize this, attributing those last moment breakouts to bad luck when in fact they were inevitable from the start. The mechanic exists only to heighten tension, a deliberate design choice to make the process feel more dramatic than the mathematics suggest. Later generations introduced additional quirks that pushed the strangeness even further. In the Sinnoh era, a system known as critical capture was quietly added. This rare occurrence caused a ball to shake only once before locking shut, skipping the usual suspense. The chance of this happening was tied to the size of the player's Pokédex, with higher completion rates making it more likely. For trainers unaware of the hidden mechanic, the sudden single shake felt like a glitch, an odd break from the familiar rhythm. In truth, it was a reward for dedication, an invisible bonus for those who had invested in filling out their collection. Another strange twist lies in how the game calculates the timing of button inputs during a throw. For decades, trainers passed around rumors that pressing a button at just the right moment improved the odds of success. These so-called capture tricks became playground legends, with some swearing that holding down a certain combination would guarantee a catch. While the mathematics proved these rituals had no effect, the persistence of the belief highlights just how mysterious the system felt. When the outcomes were invisible and often unpredictable, it was easy to imagine hidden factors at work. And in a way, those myths became part of the culture of capture itself. As we drift a little deeper tonight, let's turn our attention to another invisible system, one that shapes not just individual encounters, but entire bloodlines. Gender ratios in the Pokémon world behave in ways that often defy expectation. While many species are evenly split between male and female, others are skewed in extreme ways. Certain species have a ratio of 87.5% male and only 12.5% female, a quirk designed to make breeding more difficult. Starters often fall into this category, ensuring that trainers could not easily flood the game with eggs of rare species. On the opposite end, some species are always female, while others are always male. And then there are those with no gender at all, machines and ghosts and legendaries that defy classification entirely. This uneven distribution creates unusual consequences. Because breeding is generally tied to the female parent's species. Those with extremely rare female ratios become bottlenecks in the breeding system. A trainer trying to produce more starters would quickly discover that female individuals are precious not because of their stats or moves, but because of their ability to pass down the species itself. The idea of egg groups adds even more strangeness. Every species belongs to one or more categories that determine which creatures it can breed with. These groups are not always intuitive. A large dragon might be compatible with a delicate butterfly because they share a classification, while two similar-looking species might be unable to breed at all. The rules behind these groups have little to do with appearance and everything to do with hidden coding decisions. This has led to bizarre combinations where unexpected pairs can produce offspring despite having no obvious connection. For casual trainers, these discoveries can feel like accidents. For breeders, they become tools for passing down specific moves. Move inheritance itself is one of the most fascinating quirks of the system, known as egg moves. These are abilities a creature would not normally learn through leveling up, but can receive from its parents under certain circumstances. A male parent that knows a specific attack can sometimes pass it down to the offspring, creating combinations that feel like secrets. These oddities encouraged experimentation, leading trainers to try unusual pairings just to see what would happen. The result was a breeding system that felt half science and half mystery, filled with discoveries that were rarely explained outright. Another strange mechanic is the way natures can be passed down. Introduced in the third generation, natures subtly alter a creature's stat growth. For years, they seemed entirely random, but hidden within the breeding system was the ability to influence them using a simple item. If a parent holds an Everstone, there is a strong chance the offspring will inherit its nature. For dedicated breeders, this discovery was revolutionary, allowing them to manipulate the process and build teams with optimized personalities. Yet because it was never explained in the main story, many trainers never realized the trick, leaving them puzzled as to why some offspring consistently shared traits with their parents. Gender plays another role in inheritance through certain evolutionary lines. A specific species from Unova, for example, has different appearances depending on whether it is male or female, with the queen form being exclusive to females. This means that producing the rare variant is directly tied to gender ratios, a subtle mechanic that influences not just breeding, but the very availability of certain forms. Then there is the case of creatures that cannot breed at all. Baby Pokemon introduced in the Johto era are completely excluded from the system until they evolve. This means that no matter how many times a trainer leaves a certain baby at the daycare, it will never produce an offspring. At first glance, this seems logical, but it creates odd inconsistencies when compared to other young-looking species that can breed without issue. Similarly, legendaries are almost universally excluded, with very few exceptions. This ensures their rarity, but raises questions in the lore. If they cannot reproduce, how do they exist in the first place? The games never answer this, leaving the mystery intact. The concept of regional forms adds even more strangeness to breeding. In some cases, pairing a regional variant with a normal form produces offspring of only one type, regardless of the parentage. For example, an Alalan version of a familiar species might still produce the standard offspring under certain conditions, as though the variant does not pass down its traits in the same way. Shiny inheritance is another mechanic that quietly shapes the system. While shinies are rare enough on their own, breeding introduces a small but real chance of passing down the trait. With the introduction of the Masuda method, named after a Game Freak director, pairing parents from different language games dramatically increases the odds of hatching a shiny offspring. This mechanic was never explicitly revealed in the games, but once discovered, it transformed breeding into one of the most popular shiny hunting methods. The fact that such a powerful boost was hidden so deeply in the system makes it one of the strangest and most beloved quirks in the franchise. Slowly, the story widens into the realm of held items and battle quirks. For most trainers, the concept of items in Pokémon is simple. Potions heal, Pokeballs capture, and berries restore status. But beneath the surface lies an entire hidden system of held items that quietly alter battles in ways that are often invisible unless you already know the rules. The earliest games introduced the idea of a held item almost timidly. Back then, only a handful of creatures ever carried something, and most trainers barely noticed. But starting in the second generation, the mechanic exploded. Suddenly, every creature in the world could carry an item into battle, whether the trainer gave it one or not. Some of these items had clear uses, such as berries that automatically healed a condition when needed. Others, however, were far stranger. The King's Rock, for example, had the power to make flinching more likely, subtly changing the rhythm of battles. This effect was never clearly explained in-game, leaving trainers to wonder why their opponents seemed to hesitate so often after a certain attack. Other items affected evolutions rather than battles. The metal coat introduced in Johto was needed to trigger the evolution of certain species when combined with a trade. At first, this seemed like a natural extension of stones from the earlier games. But then the series began layering more and more unusual requirements onto items. A deep sea tooth would only work on a specific species. A magmarizer applied exclusively to a fiery duck. The arbitrary nature of these connections baffled trainers. Why should one item change one species, but not another? The logic was tenuous at best, reinforcing the sense that these mechanics were hidden puzzles designed to be discovered only by experimentation. Some held items are almost invisible in their effects. The choice band, introduced later, massively boosts attack power, but locks the holder into a single move. The fact that such a drawback existed at all was baffling to casual trainers. To them, it seemed like a punishment. Yet competitive trainers quickly realized the hidden value. Locking a strong move while doubling the stat could turn an ordinary creature into a terrifying force. The duality of these items, seeming useless at first, but devastating when understood, highlights just how strange the system really is. Other choice items followed, each with their own odd quirks. The choice specs increased special attack, while the choice scarf boosted speed. All carried the same restriction of being locked into one move. To the uninitiated, this seemed like a burden. To those who understood the system, it was a secret weapon. Weather rocks has added another layer of strangeness. When held by certain creatures, these items extended the duration of weather effects from 5 turns to 8. For casual trainers, this detail was so obscure that it often went unnoticed. Few even realized that weather had a set number of turns in the first place, let alone that it could be altered by an item. Yet for competitive battles, these tiny differences became critical, shifting entire strategies around the length of a sandstorm or the persistence of rain. Berries, though seemingly simple, hide some of the strangest mechanics of all. Beyond the obvious healing, certain varieties activate only under highly specific conditions. Some increase attack when the holder's health drops below a threshold. Others cure confusion, but only if that was the most recent status inflicted. A few even interact with the opponent, like certain berries which punish contact moves or special attacks. These niche effects are so rare that most trainers never encounter them, making their very existence feel like hidden treasures buried deep within the game's code. Then there are items that feel almost like jokes. One item boosts the critical hit rate of only one species. Another doubles the power of a yellow electric mouse when it holds it. These items are incredibly specific, existing only to buff a single creature. To outsiders, they seem like strange indulgences by the developers, gifts tucked away for fans who happen to favor those particular species. The exclusivity of these items makes them some of the quirkiest mechanics in the franchise. Battle quirks extend beyond items, reaching into hidden rules that govern how moves behave. One of the strangest is the concept of priority. Anu. The surface, the turn order in battle, is determined by speed. But hidden within the code is a hierarchy of move priorities that can override speed entirely. A move like quick attack will always strike before a slower but stronger blow, regardless of the stats. At first glance, this seems simple, but the layers of priority run deep, with multiple tiers that most trainers never realize exist. Certain status moves operate at the very top of the scale, guaranteeing their use before almost anything else. For trainers unaware of this invisible system, the results can feel baffling. Another obscure quirk lies in how critical hits function. In the early generations, they were tied not just to moves, but to the speed stat itself. This meant that fast creatures were more likely to land critical hits, creating an odd imbalance where certain species dealt far more damage than expected. Later games adjusted this system, but the legacy remains. A reminder of how strange and uneven the early mechanics could be. The fact that a creature's chance to land a devastating strike was secretly linked to its speed is one of those details most trainers would never suspect. Damage calculation itself is a labyrinth of hidden quirks. Few realize just how many steps are involved in determining whether a move knocks out an opponent. From type effectiveness to same type attack bonuses, from weather effects to hidden multipliers, the mathematics quietly stack layers upon layers of modifiers. One particularly strange aspect is the way rounding works. Because the game uses integer mathematics, fractions are dropped at each step, creating small inconsistencies. In rare cases, these rounding errors can be the difference between victory and defeat. It is a reminder that even the digital systems are subject to quirks that feel almost human in their imperfection. If you're still awake halfway through, maybe subscribe before you drift off and tell me what time it is where you're watching from. Another obscure mechanic lies in the way certain moves interact. Take the combination of beat up and justified, for example. Beat up is a move that allows each member of the team to attack in sequence. When paired with a partner that has the ability justified, which raises attack when hit by a dark type move, it becomes a strange engine for boosting power. On the surface, this interaction seems absurdly niche, yet competitive trainers discovered it and built entire strategies around it. These hidden synergies highlight how the battle system is filled with odd mechanics waiting to be uncovered. Abilities add even more hidden depth to battles. Introduced in the third generation, they at first seemed like small flavor additions, but many carry effects so unusual that they completely change the way certain species function. Levitate, for example, allows creatures to completely ignore ground-type moves. At first, this seems straightforward, but its implications ripple through every battle. Suddenly, creatures that should be weak to earthquake find themselves immune, reshaping strategies in ways that are not obvious unless you know the rule. Other abilities are even stranger. Truant forces a powerful creature to act only every other turn, balancing its immense stats with a crippling drawback. Wonder Guard renders a specific species immune to all damage, except from moves that are super effective. The rarity of such abilities and the extreme effects they carry make them some of the most bizarre mechanics in the series. They feel less like small boosts and more like experiments with entirely new rules of battle. Even more obscure are abilities that interact with very specific conditions. Forecast changes a certain creature's typing depending on the weather. Multi-type alters a godlike figure's typing based on the plate it holds. These mechanics are so specific that they almost feel like inside jokes, systems designed not for balance, but to reinforce lore. Taken together, the hidden systems of held items, battle quirks, and invisible multipliers form one of the most unusual layers of the Pokémon series. They are rarely explained outright, often invisible to casual trainers, and sometimes so specific that they seem almost arbitrary. Yet they are part of what makes the series so endlessly fascinating. Every battle carries secrets. Every item hides a purpose. Every ability has the potential to surprise. There's a quiet comfort in remembering moments like these, in understanding that beneath the surface of something so familiar lies an architecture of strangeness. One of the most fascinating parts of the Pokémon series is how encounters are determined. To most trainers, it seems straightforward. Walk through tall grass, and eventually, a wild creature appears. But beneath this simple loop lies a surprisingly complex system of hidden conditions, encounter slots, and obscure triggers that most trainers never realize exist. In the earliest titles, encounter rates were deliberately uneven. Some creatures had odds as high as 50%, meaning they seemed to appear constantly. Others were given vanishingly small percentages, sometimes as low as 1%. These hidden numbers shaped entire generations of memories. A child walking through the same patch of grass might swear that certain species never appeared, while their friend claimed to find them often. Both were right, because luck determined whether those rare slots were ever filled. This obscurity made exploration feel like discovery, but it also meant that many trainers never encountered certain species without guides or trades. By the time the second generation arrived, the developers began experimenting with environmental triggers beyond simple grass. Time of day suddenly mattered. A bat like creature might swarm caves at night, but be absent during daylight. A pink dream themed species appeared only in the small hours of the morning. These changes were never explained clearly in game. Trainers who stumbled into nighttime encounters sometimes thought they had found secret versions of creatures, not realizing that the system quietly tracked an internal clock. The addition of these hidden schedules gave the world a sense of life, as though the creatures themselves had routines separate from the trainer's journey. Another obscure mechanic introduced in Johto involved swarming. Certain species would only appear in large numbers on specific days, announced by characters in casual conversations. Without talking to those characters, trainers might never know that a route teemed with rare species for just 24 hours. These swarms were invisible otherwise, a mechanic that required not only luck, but also awareness of the world's social fabric. It blurred the line between storytelling and gameplay, making encounters feel tied to a living region rather than static programming. Ruby and Sapphire expanded the concept even further with hidden tiles on water surfaces where encounters could trigger only under certain conditions. One particular species became infamous for this mechanic, appearing on just 6 random tiles of one river at any given time. The tiles themselves shuffled whenever a certain phrase in a specific town changed, meaning the odds of finding it without guidance were astronomically low. Trainers who happened to fish on the right tile sometimes thought they had discovered a once-in-a-lifetime miracle. In reality, they had stumbled into one of the most obscure encounter mechanics in the entire franchise. The developers also tied encounters to weather in Hoenn. Some creatures appeared only during rain, while others seemed to vanish under bright sunlight. The idea that the sky itself influenced who you could meet added depth to exploration. Yet because weather patterns were semi-random and shifted only after certain in-game actions, the connection was often invisible. Many trainers thought they were imagining it when species seemed to vanish during droughts or storms. This blending of natural phenomena with encounter logic made the world feel dynamic, even though the system was ultimately hidden within the code. Overworld mechanics themselves hide countless secrets. One of the strangest involves honey trees introduced in the Sinnoh games. Trainers could slather honey on certain trunks, wait several hours in real-world time, and return to find a creature drawn to the scent. What made this mechanic unusual was how unpredictable it was. Different trees had different odds for different species, and some of the rarest encounters appeared only on specific trees scattered across the region. To make matters stranger, the waiting period aligned with the internal clock, meaning that if you missed the window, the opportunity was gone. For many trainers, the system felt opaque, leading to endless speculation about which trees were lucky or whether patterns existed. The truth was buried in complicated probability tables that almost no one saw until years later. Another overworld quirk lies in how hidden abilities or forms can appear only under specific circumstances. In certain generations, creatures encountered in special areas had guaranteed hidden abilities, while the same species found elsewhere did not. This meant that location alone determined traits invisible at first glance. For trainers unaware of the mechanic, 2 identical-looking creatures might actually differ dramatically in potential. Such details reinforced the idea that the world was filled with mysteries lurking beneath the surface. Event-based encounters are perhaps the strangest of all. Some of the most famous creatures in the series have been locked behind distributions that occurred only once in history. To obtain them, trainers had to attend real world gatherings, connect to special systems, or in some cases, even mail their game for modification. Without those opportunities, the creatures simply did not exist in a trainer's version of the world. The exclusivity turned them into legends, whispered about on playgrounds and forums. Someone who had attended the event might be the only person in a neighborhood with a mythical being, elevating them to near mythical status themselves. What makes these events even stranger is how the developers sometimes tied them to incomplete or hidden storylines. In Ruby and Sapphire, a certain event distribution was supposed to unlock a location accessible only with a special ticket. Without the event, the area remained sealed forever. Similarly, Fire Red and Leaf Green contain the code for islands that could never be reached without official event items. The data sat hidden on every cartridge, taunting trainers with inaccessible mysteries. This raised endless speculation about whether the islands could be unlocked through cheats, glitches, or secret conditions. In reality, they were gated permanently behind items distributed only at official gatherings, making them some of the strangest examples of content hidden in plain sight. Later generations introduced wireless events, which solved some of the accessibility issues, but created new quirks. Creatures obtained this way often carried moves, ribbons, or items unobtainable elsewhere. In some cases, these distributions were the only way to see a move's animation in-game tied to a species outside its usual learning set. These one-off oddities reinforced the sense that the world of Pokémon was not uniform, but shaped by fleeting opportunities that could vanish forever. Another obscure system lies in the mechanics of roaming legendaries. Introduced in the second generation, these creatures wandered the region randomly after being released, forcing trainers to track them across routes. What made the system unusual was how their positions were determined. Each time the trainer moved from one area to another, the game recalculated their location, often shifting them to an adjacent route. This meant that trainers trying to chase them often felt like the creatures were actively avoiding capture. To make matters even more frustrating, the creatures would flee immediately after one turn of combat unless trapped by a specific move or ability. The combination of randomness, fleeing, and one-chance encounters made hunting them one of the strangest and most frustrating mechanics in the series. Overworld quirks also extend to small details most trainers never notice. In certain games, the background music shifts slightly when a shiny creature appears in the overworld, even before the battle begins. This subtle cue was never explained, leaving those who noticed it unsure if they had imagined it. In other titles, weather effects continue in the overworld even after the condition has ended in battle, creating a disconnect between what trainers see and what the system actually registers. These small inconsistencies reinforce the sense that the world of Pokémon is more complicated than it seems, a patchwork of overlapping systems that occasionally reveal their seams. As we continue this gentle journey through the night, let's turn our attention to systems that exist beyond the main adventure. For most trainers, a Pokémon journey feels complete once the champion has been defeated and the credits roll. Yet the developers have always hidden another layer of depth beyond the main adventure, filling the post-game with systems and mechanics that often go unnoticed. One of the earliest examples of unusual post-game systems was the addition of facilities that enforced strict rules. Levels were capped, certain species were banned, and formats forced trainers to fight with unfamiliar constraints. For many, this was their first introduction to the idea of competitive style rule sets, a stark departure from the freedom of the main story. The mechanics behind these facilities were never explained clearly in-game. Terms existed only in the code, and in the communities that studied them, but they quietly shaped how trainers approached battles. For children playing casually, the sudden difficulty spike felt almost unfair, yet it represented an intentional glimpse into the deeper systems of the series. Later, expanded facilities introduced even more peculiar rules. Some forced trainers to rent creatures rather than bring their own, introducing the idea that victory depended less on preparation and more on adaptability. Others offered hallways of chance encounters, some filled with battles, others with status effects or healing items, blending randomness with skill. Still others emphasized exploration, turning facilities into mazes where resources had to be carefully managed. What united all of these systems was their strangeness. Each twisted the familiar mechanics of Pokémon into something entirely different, challenging assumptions and forcing trainers into new styles of play. Ribbons are another obscure mechanic tied heavily to the long-term experience of the games. Introduced in the third generation, they began as small, decorative rewards for achievements such as winning contests or completing difficult facilities. At first glance, ribbons seemed meaningless, mere trinkets in a menu. But their true strangeness lay in how they could persist across generations. A creature that earned a ribbon in one game could be transferred forward into the next, still carrying its original accolade. Over time, ribbons accumulated into a kind of invisible history, a record of where that particular individual had traveled and what it had accomplished. For those who played across multiple generations, seeing a ribbon from years ago attached to a partner felt like uncovering a hidden diary within the game itself. Some ribbons were straightforward, awarded for simple tasks. Others, however, were tied to incredibly obscure achievements. One ribbon could only be obtained by defeating every trainer in a specific challenge without a single loss. The effort required was immense, far beyond what most trainers ever attempted. Similarly, certain ribbons were tied to clearing high-level facilities, while others were distributed only during rare events. These ribbons became symbols of dedication, proof that a trainer had gone far beyond the casual journey. Because they could be carried into future generations, they became treasured heirlooms, obscure markers of history hidden within the data of a creature. Another curious long-term system involves the daycare and breeding mechanics. While most trainers understand the basics, the hidden factors influencing this process are less well known. Step counters quietly track how long it takes for an egg to appear, influenced by whether the pair shares an original trainer ID or comes from different regions. This last detail became the basis for a breeding strategy discovered by fans when they noticed that parents from different language games increased the odds of hatching shiny offspring. At first, this seemed like a rumor, a strange coincidence shared in small online communities. Only later was it confirmed as a deliberate mechanic coded into the games. The idea that geography and language could influence genetics in the Pokémon world remains one of the strangest post-game discoveries. Contests introduced in Hoenn also embody unusual mechanics tied to long-term play. Unlike battles, contests measured stats like coolness, beauty, toughness, cleverness, and cuteness, hidden values that could be influenced by feeding a creature specific treats. These contests were not just cosmetic diversions. They involved complex strategies where move combinations could impress judges and appeal points determined success. The fact that creatures had hidden condition stats entirely separate from their battle stats created a parallel system of growth that many trainers ignored. For those who explored it, contests revealed an entirely different game buried within the same cartridge, one that rewarded creativity and patience rather than raw strength. Time. Based mechanics represent another obscure layer of the Pokemon experience. Daily lotteries, phone calls from characters, swarms of rare species, and even natal heights quietly shifted depending on the real world clock. These mechanics were often invisible unless a trainer happened to check at the right moment. For example, a lottery ticket drawn once per day could reward a master ball if the numbers aligned with the trainer IDs of the party. The odds were astronomically low, and most trainers never won. Yet the mechanic persisted, a hidden incentive to return daily. Similarly, swarm announcements altered encounter tables for short periods, meaning certain species were effectively locked behind random real world timing. The integration of time into the Pokemon world created moments of surprise and frustration, reinforcing the idea that the games were alive, even when the trainer was not actively exploring. Event exclusive items represent another unusual post game quirk. Throughout the series, locations have been coded into the games, but left inaccessible without special items distributed during rare events. What made these items strange was that they existed in every copy of the game, yet could only be activated by external distribution. For most trainers, these areas remained permanently sealed, their secrets never revealed. Decades later, discovering the code for these locations within the cartridges has fascinated fans, serving as a reminder of just how much hidden content lies locked away in the series. Migration systems between generations also introduced strange quirks. Some systems allowed trainers to transfer creatures from older cartridges, but only in limited quantities per day. Once transferred, they appeared as wild encounters within special areas, requiring capture before they were officially added to the new game. This system, while charming, confused many trainers who did not understand why their longtime partners had to be recaught. Later systems refined the process, but each introduced its own quirks, from mini-games to daily restrictions. These mechanics highlighted the strangeness of maintaining continuity across generations, turning the simple act of carrying partners forward into a puzzle of its own. Taken together, these post-game systems, ribbons, and long-term mechanics form a hidden layer of Pokémon that most trainers never experience. They require patience, knowledge, and often a bit of luck to uncover. Yet for those who dive into them, they reveal a world far richer than the main adventure alone. Before we continue this gentle journey, let's drift into the realm of side systems and experimental features. Pokemon has always been more than just battling and catching. The series thrives on side systems and experimental mechanics that exist just outside the main loop, often overlooked or forgotten by trainers who focus only on the story. One of the most unusual peripherals in the series was a device released alongside Heart Gold and Soul Silver. On the surface, it functioned as a pedometer, letting trainers transfer a creature into the device and earn rewards by walking in real life. But beneath that simple idea were mechanics that made it strangely complex. Each step contributed not only to experience points for the stored creature, but also to unlocking hidden encounter routes. Certain rare species could be found only within the device's unique environments, requiring trainers to amass tens of thousands of steps. Some moves were locked behind the device, making them unobtainable through normal gameplay. For many, the accessory became a quiet obsession, blurring the line between the game world and reality in ways no other product had attempted. Another strange side system was the Dream World introduced in Generation 5. Accessible through a web browser, it allowed trainers to tuck in a creature, sending it into an online dream realm filled with mini-games and special encounters. The Dream World contained exclusive abilities that could not be obtained elsewhere, meaning that competitive play was subtly shaped by a feature many trainers ignored. Some of the most famous hidden abilities first appeared here, Yet the dream world was also fleeting. When the servers shut down, its content vanished forever. This temporary nature made it one of the strangest experiments in the series, an entire layer of gameplay that now exists only in memory and preserved data. A bonding feature introduced later altered gameplay more than trainers realized. On the surface, it seemed like a simple minigame, letting trainers pet and feed their partners. But beneath the cuteness lay hidden affection bonuses that dramatically influenced battles. High affection partners were more likely to land critical hits, dodge attacks, or survive hits that should have knocked them out. They could even break free from status conditions out of love for their trainer. None of this was clearly explained, meaning many trainers thought they were simply lucky when improbable survivals occurred. In reality, the affection system had rewritten the rules of battle, offering invisible advantages to those who invested time in bonding. Contests and their later variations also represented obscure side systems. In Hoenn, contests measured beauty, coolness, and other categories rather than strength, requiring trainers to feed special treats that altered hidden condition stats. Later, these were updated to visual performance stages, where accessories and dance routines mattered as much as move choice. These systems created a parallel game of strategy and presentation that many trainers ignored, but those who engaged with them discovered hidden depth. The obscurity lies in how these stats, completely separate from battle values, interacted with each other. A perfectly planned contest build could sweep entire categories, but without understanding the underlying mechanics, most trainers never realized the potential of these features. Secret bases introduced in Hoenn allowed trainers to carve out personalized spaces within the world. What seemed cosmetic at first actually hid layers of functionality. Decorations sometimes carried hidden attributes, such as altering encounter rates for visitors or unlocking specific interactions. Later generations reimagined secret bases as multiplayer hubs, letting trainers battle or trade through them. The sheer variety of decorations, many tied to rare items or special events, made completion a difficult task. Yet because the system was optional, many trainers never saw more than a handful of its possibilities. The underground in Sinnoh expanded this concept with mining, trading, and base creation beneath the region. What made it obscure was the regeneration mechanics buried in the system. Items respawned after specific intervals, meaning that patient trainers could slowly accumulate rare fossils and evolutionary stones. A strange currency decayed over time unless carefully managed. The idea that a hidden economy existed beneath the main game was never made obvious, and most casual trainers dismissed the underground as a distraction. Yet for those who explored its depths, it revealed a system of resource management and hidden rewards that rivaled the main adventure in complexity. Another layer of obscure mechanics ties to friendship and affection systems. While trainers were vaguely aware that certain evolutions depended on happiness, few understood the precise conditions behind it. Factors like walking steps, leveling up, item use, and even fainting influenced hidden values that the game never revealed directly. In later generations, affection and friendship became separate stats, leading to confusion about which mechanics applied to which evolutions. For instance, a creature might be affectionate enough to perform better in battle, but not actually reach the threshold required to evolve. This separation baffled trainers, who assumed the systems were identical, highlighting how hidden values could alter progression in ways invisible to the uninitiated. Side systems also included unusual features like swarms and daily events. Certain rare species appeared only during swarms announced by characters, creating fleeting opportunities tied to real-world days. Some regions had tides that altered which areas could be accessed. Others introduced rotating daily events such as contests, lotteries, and special trainers appearing in locations. These systems were obscure, not only because they were hidden, but because they required trainers to check at specific times. Missing a window meant losing the opportunity, adding to their elusive nature. Even multiplayer systems carried obscure quirks. Earlier titles allowed wireless communication, but hidden within them were features like record mixing, which quietly synced data between trainers. This led to strange outcomes, such as characters in one trainer's game suddenly referencing achievements from another's. Secret bases and even broadcasts were sometimes updated through these invisible exchanges. For many, these changes felt uncanny, as if the game world had developed memories beyond their own actions. In truth, it was the result of hidden systems designed to reward social play. Later generations introduced temporary buffs that altered gameplay in subtle ways. Many trainers ignored them, yet these powers could dramatically influence capture rates, experience gain, or item discovery. Their obscurity came not from complexity, but from presentation. They were tucked into menus or tied to character interactions that many skipped over. The most recent titles continued this tradition with cooking systems and outdoor activities. These seemed playful and minor, yet they carried hidden benefits such as increased friendship, egg production rates, and encounter boosts. The fact that these activities could alter major gameplay outcomes is rarely explained in detail, leaving many trainers to believe they were merely cosmetic diversions. Together, these side systems form a network of obscure mechanics that quietly shape the Pokémon experience. They demonstrate that the series has always been more than just battles and captures. Beneath the surface lies a world of optional systems, some fleeting, some enduring, that reward curiosity and patience for those who uncover them. Before we drift deeper into the peculiarities of individual regions, let's pause for a moment on the strangeness of move mechanics themselves. Moves in Pokemon appear simple on the surface. Each has a power value, an accuracy rating, a type, and an effect. But beneath these basic statistics lies a labyrinth of hidden properties, priority levels, and unusual interactions that most trainers never discover. Some moves have negative priority, always executing last regardless of speed. Others have positive priority, jumping ahead of normal attacks. The priority system ranges from -6 to +5, creating 12 distinct tiers of move speed that operate completely independent of stat values. This means a creature with base 1 speed could theoretically move before a creature with base 200 speed if it used a higher priority move. The existence of this hidden hierarchy shaped competitive play in ways most casual trainers never witnessed. Protect and Detect had diminishing returns when used consecutively. The first use succeeded with 100% accuracy. The second attempt had only 50% accuracy. The third had dropped to 25%. This continued with each successive use, creating a soft limit on defensive stalling. What made this strange was that the game tracked this across move variations. Using Detect after Protect still counted as consecutive use, as did moves like King's Shield and Spiky Shield. The invisible counter persisted across these related moves, creating a hidden ecosystem of protection move interactions. Multi-hit moves like Fury Swipes, Pin Missile, and Bullet Seed struck between 2 and 5 times per use, with damage calculated separately for each hit. This meant they could break through substitutes more easily than single-hit moves, as the first hit would break the substitute and subsequent hits would damage the real target. The number of hits was randomly determined, following specific probability distributions that made 5-hit occurrences relatively rare. The randomness added unpredictability to these moves, making them simultaneously unreliable and potentially devastating. Moves with charging turns, like Solar Beam, Fly, and Dig, had multiple hidden properties. During the charging turn, the user became semi-invulnerable to most attacks while using Fly or Dig. Power Herb eliminated charging turns entirely, turning 2-turn moves into instant attacks. Weather interactions removed charging requirements for certain moves. Solar Beam needed no charge in harsh sunlight, but took twice as long in rain. These conditional interactions created strategic depth around weather control and item choices. 2-turn moves also behaved strangely, with trapping effects. A creature locked by Mean Look could still escape by using Fly or Dig, effectively teleporting away during the invulnerability turn. This created unintended escape options that bypassed trapping mechanics. Bide stored damage for 2 turns, then released double the accumulated damage back at a random target. The move ignored accuracy checks and could hit through partial invulnerability. The strange part was that Bide calculated damage before applying type effectiveness, creating unusual situations where it dealt unexpected damage amounts. Mirror Move copied the opponent's last used move and used it against them. This meant that slower creatures could use powerful attacks they could never learn naturally by simply mirroring them. The move failed if the opponent hadn't used a move yet, creating strange situations in double battles where targeting became crucial to Mirror Move's success. Me first attempted to use the opponent's selected move before they could execute it with increased power. However, it failed if the user moved second, making it usable only by faster creatures. The move's requirement that the target must not have acted yet created a speed-based risk, where slight speed differences meant the difference between success and complete failure. Sleep Talk allowed the user to execute a random move from their moveset while asleep, turning a debilitating status into a source of unpredictable offense. The move could select itself, resulting in nothing happening. It could also select other moves that would normally fail, like charging moves, creating bizarre interactions. Metronome randomly selected any move in the game, including moves exclusive to certain legendary creatures, or moves that had been cut from the current generation. This made Metronome one of the most chaotic moves in existence, capable of producing outcomes ranging from useless to game-ending. The fact that it could select literally hundreds of different moves, each with their own properties and interactions, meant that Metronome outcomes were effectively impossible to predict or strategize around. Destiny Bond and Grudge represented unusual revenge mechanics. Destiny Bond caused both creatures to faint if the user was knocked out the same turn. Grudge depleted all power points from the move that knocked out the user. These moves created psychological pressure, as attacking a creature that used them carried significant risk. The window for activation was strict, requiring specific timing that most casual trainers struggled to master. Encore locked the target into repeating its last used move for several turns. This could turn powerful setup moves into wasted turns, or force creatures to repeatedly use moves that were no longer effective. The strategic value came from predicting opponent intentions and locking them into disadvantageous patterns, creating a mind game element around when to use Encore. Disable prevented the target from using their most recent move for several turns. Unlike Encore, which forced repetition, Disable forced variation. This created the interesting dynamics where creatures were pushed out of their optimal strategies. The move worked particularly well against creatures that relied heavily on single powerful moves, effectively removing their primary weapon. Taunt prevented the target from using status moves for several turns, forcing them to rely only on damaging attacks. This shut down defensive strategies that relied on healing, stat boosting, or status spreading. The existence of taunt meant that stall teams always had to account for potential disruption, unable to rely purely on passive strategies. Transform copied the target's stats, moves, and appearance, turning the user into an identical duplicate. However, the transformation had quirks. HP remained unchanged, meaning the transformed creature often had less health than the original. Transformed moves had only 5 power points each, limiting their usage. Ditto built entire strategies around transform, compensating for its low base stats by copying stronger creatures. The speed tie scenarios, where transformed creatures faced their originals, created 50-50 gambling situations determined purely by luck. Sketch permanently learned the last move used by any creature in battle. Smeargle, the only creature with Sketch, could learn any move in the game through careful setup. This made it one of the most versatile creatures, despite having terrible stats. The ability to learn moves no other creature could combine created unique utility options, from baton pass teams to spore sweepers to support sets that shouldn't exist within normal move pools. Mimic temporarily learned and replaced itself with the target's last used move, lasting only for that battle. While less permanent than Sketch, Mimic allowed on-the-fly adaptation to opponent strategies. The copied move retained its original power points, giving multiple uses of powerful attacks that the user normally couldn't access. Conversion changed the user's type to match their first move's type. Conversion 2 changed the user's type to resist the last move used against them. These type-shifting moves created unusual scenarios where creatures could adapt their defensive matchups on the fly. The strategic depth involved predicting opponent moves and aligning type changes to resist incoming attacks, turning type disadvantage into advantage through careful play. Reflect type copied the target's typing exactly, creating strange situations where creatures took on dual typings they were never designed to have. The move allowed for creative defensive adaptations, as creatures could copy defensive typings from opponents. Roleplay copied the target's ability, stealing powerful passive effects. Skill swap exchanged abilities between the user and target, creating unprecedented ability combinations. These ability manipulation moves opened strategic possibilities that went far beyond normal team building, creating one-time synergies that existed only in specific battle scenarios. Moves that modified other moves added another layer of complexity. Power Trick swapped the user's attack and defense stats, turning defensive walls into offensive threats and vice versa. Guard Swap and Power Swap exchanged stat changes between creatures, redistributing boosts and penalties. Speed Swap exchanged speed stats between user and target, allowing slow creatures to steal speed from fast ones. Heart Swap stole all stat changes from the target, potentially gaining 6 stages of boosts in one move. These swapping mechanics created unusual moments where the established dynamics of battle suddenly reversed, forcing adaptation to completely new situations. Ally Switch swapped positions with the partner in double battles, redirecting attacks and creating confusion about targeting. The move's protection priority meant it often succeeded even when the user was slower, adding another wrinkle to double battle strategy. False Swipe always left the target with at least 1 HP, making it the premier catching move. Hold Back functioned identically, giving only 2 creatures in the entire franchise access to this mechanic. The guarantee of survival made these moves essential tools for legendary hunting, where one hit too many could result in losing an irreplaceable encounter. Endeavor reduced the target's HP to match the user's current HP. When combined with Focus Sash or Sturdy, which guaranteed survival at 1 HP, Endeavor became a quasi one hit knockout move that brought any full health target down to 1 HP. This combination created strategies built entirely around surviving one hit, then crippling the opponent in return, demonstrating how move and item interactions could create effects more powerful than either component alone. Pain Split averaged the current HP of user and target, creating unusual healing or damage depending on the health difference. A nearly fainted creature could instantly restore to half health while simultaneously damaging a full health opponent. The move worked around percentages rather than fixed values, making it scale with opponent max HP in ways that bypassed normal damage formulas. Psywave dealt random damage between 1 and 1.5 times the user's level. The randomness made it unreliable, but the scaling with level rather than stats created unusual damage patterns that ignored type effectiveness entirely. Hidden Powers type varied based on individual values, creating 16 different possible type variations. The move's power also scaled with IVs in generations before 6, ranging from 30 to 70. This meant that finding the perfect hidden power required specific IV spreads, creating a subgame of breeding and hunting for creatures with ideal hidden power types and powers. The complexity of hidden power mechanics led to entire guides dedicated solely to understanding and acquiring desired variations. Secret powers' effect changed based on terrain, causing paralysis in caves, sleep in grass, and various other conditions in different environments. The move's versatility came from its context-dependent nature, adapting to location in ways no other move did. Nature Power selected different moves based on terrain, ranging from Tri-Attack in buildings to Thunderbolt on electric terrain. The move effectively granted access to 15 different attacks, depending on context, creating vast flexibility from a single move slot. Camouflage changed the user's type based on terrain, similar to how weather changed cast form's type. The terrain-based type adaptations created defensive flexibility, allowing creatures to adjust their resistances based on environment. Terrain Pulse changed type and doubled power on terrain, making it a powerful option for terrain-based teams. The move's type shifting meant it provided coverage that adapted to team strategy rather than being locked into one type. The sheer variety of conditional, swapping, type changing, ability manipulating, and context-dependent moves created a toolkit far more complex than simple offensive and defensive categories suggested. Each move represented not just an attack or effect, but a strategic possibility, a potential interaction, a hidden synergy waiting to be discovered by trainers willing to experiment beyond the obvious. Slowly, the story widens into the peculiarities of individual regions. Every Pokémon region has introduced mechanics unique to its setting, many of them hidden or obscure compared to the main flow of the journey. These regional quirks often go unnoticed, yet they shape how trainers explore, train, and even understand the world around them. One of the earliest examples lies in Sinnoh's honey trees. These golden-colored trunks could be slathered with honey, attracting wild creatures after a waiting period tied to the system clock. What made this unusual was its complexity. Each tree had hidden encounter slots, with some species locked to only a handful of locations. Rare creatures appeared on just a few trees in the entire region, and even then, at extremely low odds. The mechanic was never fully explained in-game, leaving many trainers to believe some trees were simply luckier than others. In truth, it was an intricate system of probability tables and hidden design choices, making honey trees one of the most obscure encounter systems in the series. A navigation tool in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire introduced another strange regional mechanic. This device allowed trainers to chain encounters by sneaking up on creatures in the grass. The more times a trainer encountered the same species in a row, the higher the chance of rare features appearing, such as hidden abilities or improved stats. At very high chains, shiny odds increased dramatically, making it one of the most efficient shiny hunting methods ever created. Yet the system had quirks. Chains could break if the trainer accidentally ran too far, if a wild battle interrupted, or even if the creature simply noticed them approaching. Mastering the system required a careful balance of patience and stealth, and many casual trainers never realized how powerful it was. In Alola, the introduction of totem encounters added yet another layer of complexity. These oversized creatures appeared in trials instead of traditional gyms. What made them strange was the hidden system behind their strength. Each totem had special stat boosts, and many could call allies into battle, creating multi-opponent encounters that were rare in the main series. The effects themselves were unique modifiers, not standard stat changes, coded specifically for those battles. For trainers unaware of the system, the sudden difficulty spike felt shocking. It marked one of the first times the developers openly altered core battle rules for story encounters, setting Alola apart as an experimental region. The Dynamax mechanic, introduced in Galar, carried its own obscure quirks. On the surface, it seemed simple. A creature grew to enormous size, gained boosted health, and used powerful moves. But beneath the spectacle lay hidden details. Each individual had a level increased by feeding special candy, which determined just how much its health scaled during transformation. Without raising this level, the boost was smaller, leaving some creatures weaker than expected. Furthermore, certain moves carried secondary effects beyond raw power, raising team stats, summoning weather, or setting terrain. These subtleties made the mechanic far more strategic than it first appeared. Yet the games rarely explained them clearly. Scarlet and Violet introduced the terrestrial phenomenon, one of the most unusual mechanics in the series to date. At first glance, it seemed to simply crystallize a creature and enhance its same type attacks. The obscurity lay in the fact that it could change a creature's type entirely, allowing strategies that defied expectations. A normally vulnerable species could suddenly shed its weaknesses by adopting a new type, catching opponents off guard. What made this even stranger was how hidden factors influenced the system. Special battles distributed rare types unevenly, with some combinations nearly impossible to find. Additionally, certain species had fixed rare types that only appeared in specific locations, creating an invisible layer of regional exclusivity. Weather remains a recurring regional mechanic, but it has appeared in obscure forms across different games. In Hoenn, tides shifted water levels, opening or closing cave passages depending on the time of day. In Galar, weather determined which wild creatures appeared in the overworld, with some species locked to conditions like thunderstorms or sandstorms. The obscure part of this system was how weather was tied to the console's internal clock, cycling on a monthly pattern that many trainers never noticed. This meant that certain encounters were effectively locked behind real-world dates, creating a hidden calendar of availability. Another regional quirk comes from swarm mechanics. While swarms began in Johto, they evolved over time. In Sinnoh, broadcasts announced daily swarms of specific species, altering encounter tables across the map. In Unova, swarms appeared as visible patches in specific areas, blending the mechanic with visible overworld movement. Each region reimagined the system slightly, creating subtle differences that trainers might never notice unless they compared games directly. The obscurity lies in how these mechanics were quietly altered, hidden beneath familiar appearances. Fishing also carried obscure regional quirks. In certain games, fishing spots appeared as bubbles in water, and chaining consecutive catches increased shiny odds or encounter chances for rare species. Missing a catch broke the chain, adding pressure to what seemed like a casual pastime. The system encouraged patience and rhythm, rewarding trainers who mastered timing. Yet because it was never explained in detail, many assumed it was pure luck. In reality, it was one of the most structured shiny hunting methods available, hidden within a simple rod mechanic. Another obscure mechanic, tied to regions, was the introduction of field abilities and overworld effects. In Hoenn, certain creatures could be taught moves that not only enabled exploration, but also triggered hidden encounters. One utility move occasionally produced wild battles with unique species, turning a navigation tool into a subtle encounter mechanic. Similarly, certain trees in Johto produced specific species, some available only during certain times of day. These quirks blended exploration with battling in ways that felt natural, but were rarely explained. Later regions introduced specialized facilities tied to these mechanics. In Alola, a feature let trainers send creatures on expeditions to gather items or train while idle. What seemed like a minor side feature actually contained hidden growth systems, with yield scaling based on the number of creatures assigned or the time spent away. In Galar, an open-world hub existed where weather, time, and player movement all influenced spawns. Certain rare encounters appeared only under very specific conditions, such as a single tile of tall grass during a thunderstorm. These hyper-specific details turned casual exploration into a treasure hunt, rewarding those who noticed patterns invisible to most. The strangest regional mechanics often came from experiments that never returned. Special rotating areas in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire offered daily islands accessible only by soaring through the sky. These areas contained rare legendaries or valuable items, but their appearance depended on the internal clock and sometimes special wireless features. Because the conditions were so specific, many trainers never saw more than a handful of these locations, leaving vast amounts of content effectively hidden. Similarly, Black and White's hidden grottos appeared in fixed places, but only regenerated items and creatures after specific steps were taken, another mechanic tied to invisible counters. When viewed together, these regional quirks reveal just how experimental the series has always been. Each mechanic reflects the willingness by the developers to hide depth behind simple surfaces. For most trainers, these mechanics pass unnoticed, shaping encounters and strategies without explanation. But for those who study them, they reveal an intricate world where every region carries its own secrets, where discovery lies not only in story progression, but in uncovering the invisible rules that govern the world. There's a quiet comfort in remembering moments like these, in understanding that beneath the familiar lies something strange and wonderful. From the earliest days of the franchise, trading has been more than a simple way to fill the Pokédex. Beneath its surface lies a collection of obscure mechanics that shape the way trainers connect, not just with their creatures, but with each other. One of the strangest trade-related mechanics appeared right in the first generation. When a creature is traded between games, its experience growth rate increases. A traded partner grows faster, gaining bonus experience with every battle. On the surface, this seems straightforward, a reward for social interaction. But hidden within this mechanic was a twist. Traded creatures often disobeyed if the trainer did not have enough badges, refusing to use moves or loafing around mid-battle. This system created a strange balance, rewarding trainers with faster growth, but punishing them for relying too heavily on someone else's partner. It was a quiet way of nudging trainers toward independence, and many first encountered it only after their new companion suddenly ignored commands. The introduction of in game trades also carried hidden quirks. Often, these trades produced creatures with unusual moves they could not normally learn by leveling up. In some cases, they also came with fixed nicknames or even different balls than what trainers had access to. These quirks were subtle, but they gave traded creatures personality, almost as if the unseen trainers who sent them over left a mark that carried them into the player's journey. Held items became part of the trading equation in later generations, adding another layer of obscurity. Creatures obtained through trades sometimes carried berries or evolutionary stones, items that were otherwise rare. Later, items became essential for triggering evolutions mid-trade, creating moments where two trainers had to coordinate carefully to ensure neither lost out. What seemed like a simple swap now carried complex hidden mechanics, making trade-based evolutions some of the most mysterious discoveries for trainers without access to guides. When Ruby and Sapphire introduced record mixing, the mechanic went largely unnoticed by casual trainers. By linking systems, trainers could transfer records of secret base designs, trendy phrases, and even in television shows that appeared in-game. Hidden within this was a bizarre detail. Mixing with trainers who had completed certain events could spread those events into another trainer's game. This included things like berry glitch fixes or the availability of certain items. It turned social connection into a form of update distribution long before internet patches became standard. Few trainers realized that by sitting down with a friend and linking cables, their world could subtly change forever. Migration mechanics added even more strangeness. Systems in Diamond and Pearl allowed trainers to transfer creatures from older titles, but with unusual restrictions. Only 6 could be migrated per day, and they had to be recaptured in a special safari-like setting. This bizarre system created a sense of ceremony around migration, as though each transfer had to be earned again. In later generations, new systems streamlined the process, yet each step came with invisible limitations. Certain moves were wiped during transfer. Items could not be carried over. Some species simply became inaccessible due to compatibility quirks. These rules created a labyrinth of mechanics that determined which creatures could truly stand the test of time across generations. The Global Trade Station, first introduced in the 4th generation, offered another strange twist. Trainers could deposit a creature and request another in exchange, sometimes setting impossible conditions like asking for legendaries at level 1. Beneath the absurd requests, however, the system carried quirks that shaped its function. Shiny odds were unaffected by the system, but nicknames and languages tied to the original owner remained intact, creating opportunities for collectors to find rare international versions. The station also served as the birthplace of countless myths, with rumors spreading about hidden algorithms or secret creatures appearing if certain codes were entered. Though most of these were false, the aura of mystery reflected how little the games explained about how the system truly worked. Perhaps the most obscure communication mechanic came with Wonder Trade and X and Y. At first glance, it seemed like a novelty. Put up a creature, and in return receive a random one from another trainer anywhere in the world. But the hidden systems behind it made it more than just chaos. Wonder Trade became a vector for event distribution, rare shinies being spread far beyond their original origins. The randomness carried a strange cultural weight, turning every trade into a lottery. For many trainers, it was their first taste of a global community, a reminder that even in a simple exchange, the world was vast and unpredictable. Street Pass and local wireless functions created even more unusual mechanics. In the Alola region, a facility relied heavily on these features. Trainers could encounter avatars of others they had passed in real life, unlocking mini games and rewards. Yet beneath the cheerful exterior lay obscure limitations. Certain shops and items only appeared if enough interactions were logged, meaning that some trainers without regular street pass opportunities missed out entirely. It was a mechanic that blended social life with gameplay in a way that often felt invisible. Trading also carried obscure details tied to moves and forms. In Black and White, a certain creature transferred into Unova automatically lost access to its special forms until it was given the appropriate items again. Similarly, certain alternate forms reverted upon transfer between games. These silent transformations made trading feel almost like a filter, as though the receiving world enforced its own laws of reality. Trainers who did not expect these reversions often felt like their creatures had changed identities mid-journey. Hidden within the code of some games are strange communication mechanics that never saw full use. Early titles contained remnants of systems designed for link cable events that were cut before release. Later, data miners uncovered unused networks tied to global features, suggesting planned systems that would have allowed more direct online interaction. These ghosts of communication systems serve as reminders that the games have always experimented with connectivity, even if the most ambitious ideas never made it past testing. Even nicknames themselves carry obscure mechanics in trade. A creature received in a different language retains its original name, sometimes with unique characters or accents. In certain cases, trainers exploited this for strategies in shiny hunting, using international pairs to trigger special methods. What seemed like a simple cosmetic detail turned it into a crucial mechanic for collectors seeking rare variants. The interplay between language, trade, and probability is one of those hidden layers that most casual trainers never notice, but that deeply shaped the competitive and collecting communities. One of the strangest aspects of trading mechanics is how they serve as gateways to content otherwise inaccessible. Certain items or creatures exist only through special distributions or events, and once obtained, they could be passed down through generations of transfers. The mechanics of these trades often determined whether something remained rare or became commonplace. A single event distribution could echo across years, with the mechanics of migration ensuring its continued legacy. Without careful observation, these details look like ordinary trades, but beneath them lies a web of hidden systems that have kept the series alive for decades. In the end, trading, migration, and communication mechanics reveal just how much of Pokémon exists beneath the surface. From faster growth rates and disobedience quirks to hidden record sharing, daily transfer limits, and randomized global trades, each system is filled with invisible details that shape the experience. For most trainers, these mechanics pass quietly, felt but not understood. For those who dig deeper, they uncover a world where even the act of exchanging creatures hides layers of mystery, turning every trade into more than just a swap. It becomes part of the hidden story of the series itself. The Safari Zone deserves special mention as one of the strangest overworld systems ever implemented. Instead of traditional battles, trainers had to rely on throwing bait or rocks before attempting a capture. The mechanics behind these options were poorly explained and in some cases even contradictory. Bait was supposed to keep creatures around longer, but lowered catch rates. Rocks increased catchy odds, but made escape more likely. In practice, the formulas often behaved unpredictably, leading trainers to debate endlessly about whether bait ever worked at all. Even today, the exact mathematics remain a point of fascination, with fans diving into the code to uncover the truth. The Safari Zone created a unique tension where normal battle rules were suspended entirely, replaced by a system that felt almost like gambling. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed drifting through these quiet facts, there's another video waiting on the left of your screen. Maybe let it play while you rest. You might learn something new before you drift off again.